I want you to picture yourself in the pitch black. Just completely dark. It's October 1837. You are standing on the wooden deck of a luxury steamboat, but, well, there's no luxury left at this point.
Right. Not at all.
There is absolutely no light. I mean, the lanterns have all blown out, or the crew intentionally extinguished them because they are just terrified of a fire breaking out.
Yeah, fire on a wooden ship in a storm is a death sentence.
Exactly. And the wind is screaming. I mean, it has this physical, deafening force that literally snatches the breath out of your lungs before you can even scream for help.
You can't even hear the person next to you.
You can't. And the ship beneath your boots is twisting. It's literally flexing. You can hear the agonizing sound of iron rivets popping and these thick oak timbers splintering under the massive strain.
It's just tearing itself apart.
Tearing apart, and then out of the darkness, this massive wall of freezing black water slams into you. And you feel the person who was standing right next to you, someone you were literally just talking to, they simply get erased from the deck.
Swept right out into the void.
Just gone. Swept out into the void. And in that terrifying, suffocating moment, as the freezing water rises over your own ankles, you are hit with this primal, isolating realization, The ocean does not care if you live or die. It is just a completely, utterly indifferent force.
Oh, it really is. It's the ultimate psychological fracture. I mean, we spend our entire lives walking on solid ground.
Right.
Right. Assuming we have this baseline level of control over our environment.
Right, we assume we're safe.
Exactly. But when you are trapped out there in the dark, miles from the shore, that illusion of control just dissolves instantly. The ocean stops being this beautiful landscape you look at, and it reveals itself as a violent, kinetic environment that is actively trying to consume you.
Actively hostile.
Yeah, and there's absolutely nowhere to run.
And that feeling of nowhere to run, that is exactly what we are exploring today. You are embarking on a deep dive into the harrowing, honestly blood-soaked realities of maritime disasters.
It gets incredibly dark.
So dark. We are examining the historical dread and the chilling legends that just saturate the waters off Ocracoke Island and Beaufort Inlet in North Carolina. We are heading straight into the graveyard of the Atlantic.
A very fitting name, unfortunately.
Oh, truly. We have a massive stack of historical accounts, eyewitness depositions, and maritime forensic analyses, and we are going to reconstruct two distinctly terrifying events today.
Two very different kinds of monsters.
Right. First, we are going to look at the calculated, just cold-blooded malice of a pirate captain who intentionally sacrificed his own ship and his own men.
Which is still hard to wrap my head around.
It's insane. And then we're going to dissect that nightmare. I just described the agonizing 1837 fight for survival aboard a doomed steamboat that was driven straight into the sea by sheer catastrophic human hubris.
Hubris is always the killer, isn't it? But to truly grasp the horror of these events, we really first have to understand the geography of the Outer Banks itself. Because it's not like any other coastline.
It really isn't. It's unique.
Yeah, I mean, the graveyard of the Atlantic isn't just some dramatic nickname for tourists. It's a literal geographical trap. The barrier islands of North Carolina are essentially just these fragile, shifting ribbons of sand.
Just sandbars, really.
Right. And you have the warm Gulf Stream colliding directly with the freezing Labrador Current right off the coast. So that collision creates this sudden, violent atmospheric volatility.
Which means storms just appear out of nowhere.
Exactly. Hurricanes and massive squalls can spin up with terrifying speed.
And the water itself is actively deceptive.
Oh, highly deceptive. I mean, the shoals, which are these massive underwater sand dunes, they're constantly moving. Diamond shoals, for example, it extends miles out into the ocean. And the depth can literally go from 40 feet down to just 3 feet in a matter of yards.
So you think you're in deep water and suddenly you hit a wall of sand.
Yeah. For mariners in the 18th and 19th centuries who were relying on, sounding leads and these outdated paper charts, it was essentially a minefield.
Because the map is wrong the second a storm passes.
Exactly. You couldn't trust your map because the bottom of the ocean literally changed shape after every single storm. One misread patch of water or a sudden fog bank rolling in meant your wooden ship was violently slamming into a compacted sandbar.
Getting battered to pieces by the surf.
Right. This single stretch of coastline has claimed thousands of ships.
Thousands. It's like walking into a haunted house, but the doors lock behind you the second you lose sight of land.
That's a great way to put it.
You are trapped in this fragile wooden box. But here's the question that really gets me when looking at our sources for this deep dive. When you are out there in the 1700s, trapped in this wooden box in the pitch black, how much of the terror is the environment itself, And how much is the creeping realization that the person steering your ship might actually be the monster?
That is an incredibly dark dynamic to think about. And when we look at our first subject today, Edward Teach, infamously known as Blackbeard, we're examining a man who fundamentally understood that dynamic.
Surprisingly read the book on it.
He really did. He weaponized the terror of the environment and the sheer isolation of the sea to exert absolute psychological dominance over his victims.
And we really have to do some heavy lifting here for you listening to strip away the Hollywood veneer of this guy.
Yeah, no parrots or peg legs here.
Right, we have to forget the cartoonish, bumbling pirate stumbling around with a bottle of rum. Because the historical Edward Teach was a highly intelligent, intensely calculating warlord.
A military tactician, really.
Let's talk about the visual reality of this man. Because if you are a merchant sailor in 1717 and your ship is suddenly boarded by Teach, I mean, it must have felt like a demon was physically manifesting on your deck.
The eyewitness depositions from the time are genuinely chilling because of their specificity. Captain Henry Bostock, who was captured by him in 1717, described Teach as this tall, broad-shouldered, incredibly imposing figure.
He wasn't dressed in rags either.
No, not at all. He wore dark, heavy clothing, these thick knee-length boots, and he would often wear a long coat made of expensive, brightly colored silk or velvet that he had plundered from wealthy merchants.
So he looked wealthy and terrifying.
Yeah. But the defining feature was, of course, the beard. I mean, it was pitch black, exceptionally thick, and it grew all the way up to his eyes.
Reacted to the eyes.
Yeah, he let it grow to this extravagant length, and he would braid it into intricate pigtails, twisting brightly colored ribbons into the hair.
Which is wild, but the detail that really crosses the line into pure psychological horror for me is what he did right before a battle, the slow matches.
Oh, yeah.
The slow matches.
Let's explain what those actually were, because the mechanics of it make it so much worse than people realize.
Right. A slow match wasn't just a simple piece of string. It was a thick length of hemp cord that had been heavily soaked in a chemical solution, usually saltpeter and lime water, and then dried out.
So it's basically a fuse. Exactly.
Yeah.
This chemical treatment meant that when you lit the cord, it wouldn't just burn up quickly like a candle wick. It would smolder very slowly, sparking and sputtering. And it released this acrid, thick, sulfurous smoke.
Like gunpowder smoke.
Yeah. During normal naval engagements, gunners used these matches to ignite the cannons. But Teach would take several of these chemically treated cords, light them on fire, and literally tuck them under the brim of his wide hat.
Just dangling down.
Yeah, dangling right down around his face.
Okay, just put yourself on the deck of a merchant ship for a second. The air is already thick with the metallic smell of blood and this blinding fog of gun smoke from the initial warning shots.
It's chaos.
Pure chaos. And stepping through that smoke is this towering giant in dark velvet. His face is completely obscured by a wild braided beard, and there's literal fire, sparks, and toxic chemical smoke hissing and pouring from his head.
He looked like his skull was actively on fire.
Yes. Charles Johnson's famous 18th century account noted that Teach made such a terrifying figure that the human imagination couldn't possibly conjure a fury from hell to look more frightful.
Which is high praise for a pirate.
But we have to analyze why he did this. It wasn't just madness.
No, not at all. It was a masterclass in risk management.
Risk management? How so?
Because violence is actually economically inefficient for a pirate.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. I mean, if you engage in a prolonged cannon battle, you might accidentally sink the ship you are trying to rob, which ruins the cargo you want to steal.
Right. You get nothing.
Exactly. Or you might lose your own skilled crewmen who are very hard to replace out on the ocean. But if you cultivate a physical appearance so viscerally, overwhelmingly terrifying, that the opposing crew takes one look at you and immediately surrenders in sheer panic, you win the prize without firing a single shot.
You save your men and the cargo. That is brilliant.
It is. And the historical record confirms the brilliance of this strategy. Up until his final fatal battle, there is no verified historical account of Blackbeard ever actually murdering or torturing a captive who surrendered to him.
Really? None?
None. The theatrical terror did all the heavy lifting for him.
Wow. So the implication of violence is almost more powerful than the violence itself.
Absolutely.
But we need to look at what he did with that power, because he didn't just use it to rob, small fishing boats. He built a literal floating fortress. The capture and transformation of the ship called the Concorde is where Teach goes from being just a nuisance to a massive geopolitical threat.
Yeah, the scale of his operation jumps massively here. In November 1717, down near the island of St. Vincent, Teach intercepts a huge French flading vessel named La Concorde.
And slaving vessels were uniquely built, right?
Very uniquely built.
Yeah.
A slave ship of that era was already constructed to be heavily armed and incredibly fast because human cargo was immensely valuable to the empires, and the owners expected to be hunted by privateers.
So Teach captures this massive fast ship.
He captures it, decides to keep it, and fundamentally retrofits it for war.
He renames it the Queen Anne's Revenge, and the engineering upgrade here is just staggering.
It is. He heavily reinforces the hull and mounts 40 cannons on her decks.
40 cannon.
To put that in perspective, the Queen Anne's Revenge now possessed the equivalent firepower of a British Royal Navy frigate.
That's a military warship.
Exactly. And he crews this floating behemoth with over 300 seasoned pirates. He isn't just a pirate captain anymore. He commands one of the most formidable independent warships operating in the entire Western Hemisphere.
And he uses this warship to execute one of the most audacious, genuinely terrifying maneuvers in maritime history. The blockade of Charlestown, which is modern-day Charleston, South Carolina.
Yeah, he takes on a whole city.
Right. He doesn't just attack a ship, he attacks a colonial capital.
In May 1718, Teach, who has now just awarded himself the rank of Commodore, by the way, naturally, he sails his flotilla of ships right up to the Charlestown Bar, which is the shallow entrance to the harbor. And he just drops anchor.
He effectively places a loaded gun to the head of the entire city.
That's exactly what it was. Over the course of a week, he stops, boards, and ransacks every single vessel trying to enter or leave that port.
And he starts taking hostages, prominent hostages, like Samuel Wragg, who was a really powerful member of the provincial council.
And he doesn't put these wealthy hostages up in a nice guest cabin. He throws them down into the dark, sweltering, rat-infested hold of the Queen Anne's Revenge.
Think about the absolute dread of that environment for a second. You are a wealthy, aristocratic politician.
Used to luxury.
Right. One minute you are traveling in comfort, and the next you are crammed into the claustrophobic belly of a pirate galleon. You are surrounded by the smell of unwashed bodies, raw gunpowder, and putrid bilge water.
In the dark.
In the dark. And you can hear the heavy footsteps of 300 heavily armed, dangerous men pacing the wooden deck right above your head.
Just waiting to hear your fate.
And then you find out what Blackbeard's ransom demand actually is. And this is where the gritty reality of piracy really hits home. Because he doesn't demand gold.
No, he demands medicine.
Right. Why medicine? Like, why not gold?
Well, we have to look to the medical reality of 1718, especially for an outlaw community living in the hot, humid tropics.
Okay.
A pirate crew of 300 men living in incredibly close quarters is just a massive breeding ground for disease. They were suffering from severe outbreaks of syphilis, malaria, dysentery, and scurvy.
Oh, that sounds horrific.
It was. Gold is completely useless if your entire crew is actively rotting to death from the inside out.
Fair point.
So Teach sends a message to the governor of South Carolina with an ultimatum. Send a chest of very specific medicinal drugs, or he will sever the heads of all the Charlestown hostages, send the heads to the governor in a box, and burn every captured ship to the waterline.
The stakes are literally apocalyptic for these hostages. So Teach sends one of the prisoners, a Mr. Marks, along with 2 pirates, into Charlestown to secure the drugs.
He gives them a strict 2-day deadline.
Right, but the deadline passes, and Marks doesn't come back.
The psychological pressure inside that ship's hold must have been agonizing. As the deadline passes, Teach actually pulls up his anchors and moves his heavily armed fleet even closer into the harbor.
Which causes absolute mass hysteria among the citizens on land.
Oh, people were fleeing. The governor is terrified. The hostages down in the dark are actively preparing to have their throats cut. And then finally, a small rowboat approaches the Queen Anne's Revenge.
And the reason for the delay is almost dark comedy, but the stakes are literally life and death.
It really is. Mr. Marks gets back to the ship and frantically explains what happened to Teach. Their boat had capsized on the way in, which slowed them down initially.
Okay, bad luck.
But they had actually managed to present the demands to the governor, and the town council, in a total panic, had gathered the expensive medical supplies very quickly. The drugs were ready almost immediately.
So what was the holdup? Why didn't they come right back?
Well, the 2 pirates that Teach had sent to escort Mr. Marks had wandered off into the Charlestown taverns, found some of their old drinking buddies, and spent the entire time getting completely blackout drunk.
You have got to be kidding me.
No, The colonial authorities literally had to organize a manhunt through the town's brothels and pubs just to find these two pirates, sober them up enough to put them back in a boat, and send them back with the medicine.
It is absurd. You have the entire geopolitical balance of the colony resting on two pirates going on a bender.
History is strange.
It really is. But Teach keeps his word. He gets his medicine. He releases the hostages, though. In a final act of humiliation, he strips them of all their expensive clothing and jewelry, sending them back to town half naked.
Just to make a point.
Right. He is at the absolute apex of his power. He holds the colonial capital hostage and completely wins. And yet, mere weeks later, this entire pirate empire comes crashing down violently at Beaufort Inlet. We have to dissect the disaster of June 1718.
Yeah, the fall is incredibly rapid. Following the blockade, Teach's flotilla sails north along the Carolina coast. The destination is Topsail Inlet, which is known today as Beaufort Inlet.
Okay.
The operational goal is to careen the ships. Now, careening was a necessary, grueling maintenance process where a ship is intentionally grounded on a soft sandbank at high tide.
So they beached the ship on purpose.
Yes. When the tide goes out, the ship tips over onto its side, exposing the hull so the crew can violently scrape off the accumulated barnacles, seaweed, and shipworms that slowly destroy the wood and slow the vessel down.
But on Juneteenth, the Queen Anne's Revenge doesn't gently ground on a soft beach. It suffers a catastrophic impact.
Right. The flagship was attempting to navigate the narrow, shifting channel of the inlet when it violently ground into a hidden, deeply submerged sandbar.
And the physics of this are terrifying. You have a massive, fully loaded wooden warship carrying 40 heavy iron cannons, tons of ammunition, and 300 men moving fast under sail.
A huge amount of momentum.
Exactly. When the keel hits that compacted sand, the deceleration is instantaneous. The agonizing sound of the heavy mainmast cracking under its own forward momentum.
People being thrown everywhere.
Right, and the massive oak timbers of the hull screaming and splintering as the sheer weight of the ship crushes its own spine against the ocean floor.
It's absolute chaos. 300 men are thrown violently across the decks. And in the panic, one of the smaller sloops in the fleet, the Adventure, which is commanded by Israel Hands, attempts to maneuver in close to pull the flagship free.
Trying to run a rescue tow.
Yeah, but the Adventure misjudges the current and also runs hard aground. So within minutes, Teach has lost his massive floating fortress and his secondary ship.
Just like that.
Both vessels are severely damaged, their hulls compromised beyond repair by the pounding surf.
Okay, so on paper, if you just read a summary, this looks like classic Outer Banks bad luck. A tragic navigational error where the shifting sands claim 2 more victims.
Right, just nature doing what it does.
But when we dig into the historical depositions in our sources, a much, much darker narrative emerges. Because this might not have been an accident at all.
The forensic historical consensus, which is supported by researchers like Angus Constam and Robert Lee, and crucially, by the actual testimony of the pirates themselves, points to deliberate sabotage.
Sabotage by who?
By Teach. A man named Ignatius Pell, who was the boatswain on one of the other ships in the fleet, was later captured, and he testified in a colonial court. His statement under oath was unequivocal. He said, and I quote, "The ship was run ashore and lost, which Thatch caused to be done." Thatch being another spelling of Teach.
Wait, I need to pause here. You're saying Blackbeard intentionally drove his own 40-gun warship into a sandbar to destroy it? Why?
I know, it sounds crazy.
This is like a CEO executing a hostile corporate downsizing by intentionally crashing the company jet. Seems completely insane.
It seems insane until you look at the economics and the geopolitical walls that were rapidly closing in on him. Teach was incredibly smart. He knew that the golden age of piracy was ending.
The authorities were cracking down.
Heavily. The British Crown was actively offering pardons to pirates who surrendered, but they were also sending heavily armed pirate hunters under the command of men like Woodes Rogers to violently purge the Caribbean of anyone who didn't surrender.
So the Queen Anne's Revenge went from being an asset to a massive liability.
Exactly. The ship was massive. It required deep water to sail, which meant it couldn't easily hide in the shallow, hidden inlets of the Carolina coast.
It stands out.
And it was highly conspicuous. Furthermore, a crew of 300 men requires an immense amount of food, and more importantly, they all demand a massive share of the plunder.
Oh, the payroll was too high.
Right. Teach did the brutal, psychopathic mental math. By deliberately wrecking the flagship and the Adventure, he artificially manufactured a crisis.
And his solution to the crisis is pure malice.
It really is. He takes the remaining small sloop, the Revenge. He quietly loads all of the most valuable treasure, the gold, and the essential survival supplies onto it.
Just for himself.
He selects a small core group of his most trusted men to join him. And then he takes roughly 25 of his own loyal crewmen, men who had just fought and bled for him at Charlestown, and he strands them on a desolate, sandy spit of land about 3 miles from the mainland.
He just leaves them there.
No food, no water. He literally marooned his own employees to die of exposure, simply to decrease the overhead and increase his own cut of the profits.
See, that is the real monster. The terrifying thing about Blackbeard wasn't the chemical smoke coming out of his hat. It was the fact that he could look at 25 of his own loyal men, strip them of their supplies, drop them on a sandbar in the blazing sun, and sail away without losing a wink of sleep.
Total sociopath.
It is cold-blooded, calculated betrayal. But this arrogance, this absolute belief that he can manipulate everyone around him, sets the stage perfectly for the violence that is finally going to catch up with him.
Yeah, his luck was about to run out. He downsizes his crew, sails up to Bath, North Carolina, and formally accepts a royal pardon from the colonial governor Charles Eden.
So he retires.
For a brief moment, yeah. He plays the role of a retired gentleman. But the addiction to the lifestyle is just too strong. Within months, he's back out on the water, capturing French merchant ships and dragging them back into North Carolina waters.
And this blatantly corrupt arrangement with Governor Eden, because Eden is clearly looking the other way, absolutely infuriates the governor of neighboring Virginia, Alexander Spotswood.
Spotswood is a very, very different kind of man. He views North Carolina as a lawless backwater. He believes, with very good reason, that Governor Eden is actively receiving kickbacks from Blackbeard's piracy.
Which he almost certainly was.
Oh, definitely. And Spotswood decides he is not going to respect jurisdictional boundaries. He has zero legal authority to send military forces into North Carolina, but he secretly finances and organizes a covert, highly illegal strike team to hunt Blackbeard down and eliminate him once and for all.
And this brings us to the bloody waters of Teach's Hole off Ocracoke Island in November 1718. Spotswood launches a two-pronged attack. He sends forces overland to secure the town of Bath, but the real threat is the naval detachment commanded by Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy.
The man who would finally end it.
Now, Maynard knows he can't bring massive naval galleons into the Outer Banks, right?
No, a deep draft galleon would suffer the exact same fate as the Queen Anne's Revenge. The water's way too shallow, so Maynard commandeers 2 shallow draft sloops, named the Jane and the Ranger.
Let's explain what a shallow draft means for you listening, because the naval architecture here dictates the entire flow of the battle.
Sure. The draft of a ship is the vertical distance between the waterline and the bottom of the keel. A deep draft gives a ship stability in the open ocean, but means it will scrape the bottom in shallow water.
It goes too deep.
Right. A shallow draft vessel has a flatter bottom, allowing it to glide over sandbars and navigate those narrow tidal inlets. Maynard essentially chose naval sports cars over naval tanks.
That makes sense.
They were fast, they could go anywhere Blackbeard could go, but they lacked heavy armor and heavy cannons.
So Maynard stealthily approaches Ocracoke Inlet. On the evening of November 21st, he spots Blackbeard's remaining sloop, the Adventure, anchored on the inner side of the island in a deep channel that we now literally call Teach's Hole.
They named it after him.
Yeah. But Maynard is incredibly disciplined. He doesn't attack in the dark. He stops all maritime traffic from entering the inlet so no one can warn the pirates, drops anchor out of sight, and waits for dawn.
Meanwhile, on the Adventure, Blackbeard is completely unaware. He actually hosts a drinking party on deck that night with some local traders.
Just having a good time.
Yeah, but his crew is vastly reduced from his glory days. Because he had dispersed many of his men and marooned others, he only has about 20 to 25 pirates on board.
I want to paint the picture of this morning because the tension here is incredible. It is November 22nd. Dawn breaks. The water of the inlet is completely still, like glass. There is a dense, freezing, eerie morning mist rolling off the sandbars.
Very cinematic.
And suddenly, emerging from that white fog, flying the British Union Jack, are Maynard's 2 sloops. They are preceded by a small rowboat, where a man is frantically dropping a weighted line into the water, taking depth sounding so the sloops don't run aground in the fog.
Blackbeard realizes immediately what is happening. He cuts his anchor cable. He doesn't even take the precious time to haul the anchor up just to get his ship moving fast. He furiously maneuvers the Adventure to bring his heavy starboard cannons to bear on the narrow channel that Maynard's ships absolutely must pass through.
And across the still, misty water, we get this legendary exchange. The ships are close enough that the men can clearly hear each other. Blackbeard stands at the rail and shouts across the water, "Damn you for villains, who are you, and from whence came you?"
And Maynard, standing completely calmly on his own deck, shouts back that there are no pirates and they are coming to seize him.
Blackbeard demands that Maynard send a boat over so he can see who he is. Maynard refuses, stating he will come aboard himself with his ship.
And this is where Teach seals his fate. He is holding a glass of liquor from the night before. He raises it in the air, looks directly at the Royal Navy lieutenant, and screams, "Damnation seize my soul if I give you quarters or take any from you."
He is declaring an absolute fight to the death.
No surrender. No prisoners.
And he initiates the violence immediately. As Maynard's ships maneuver closer, the Adventure unleashes a devastating broadside from its cannons.
And we have to stop and explain the horrific mechanical reality of an 18th century broadside.
Yeah, because this isn't like a modern missile strike. What is actually coming out of those cannons?
It's a combination of round shot, which are solid iron balls designed to smash through wooden holes and shatter masts, and grape shot, or canister shot.
Grape shot is terrifying.
It is. Grape shot is essentially a heavy canvas bag filled with dozens of smaller iron balls. When the cannon fires, the bag shreds, and the cannon acts like a massive, terrifying shotgun. At close range, it is designed specifically for anti-personnel destruction. It sweeps across the exposed deck of an enemy ship, tearing through human bodies, severing limbs, and turning the ship's own wooden splinters into deadly shrapnel.
The impact on Maynard's forces is catastrophic. In a single instant of fire and deafening noise, the deck of the Jane and the Ranger basically becomes a slaughterhouse.
It was devastating.
Maynard loses as much as a third of his total force in seconds. 20 men on the Jane are killed or severely wounded. On the Ranger, the commander, Mr. Hyde, is instantly killed, and the sloop's rigging is so badly shredded that it falls completely out of the fight, just drifting away.
The deck of Maynard's sloop is instantly slick with blood. The air is choked with the smell of sulfur and the metallic scent of vaporized blood. But this is where Maynard proves his tactical brilliance.
He doesn't panic.
He doesn't. He realizes he is heavily outgunned by Blackbeard's artillery. If he stays on deck, his entire crew will be annihilated by the next volley. So he orders every single surviving crew member to go below decks.
Imagine the terror of that order. You are a British sailor. Your friends have literally just been ripped apart. And now you are ordered to climb down a ladder into the dark, claustrophobic, stifling hold of the ship.
While under fire.
Yes. You are standing shoulder to shoulder with terrified men in the pitch black, gripping your cutlass and your single-shot flintlock pistol, listening to the ocean slapping against the hull, just waiting to be boarded.
Maynard remains on deck completely alone, except for one man steering at the helm. He orders the helmsman to drive the Jane directly into the Adventure.
From Blackbeard's perspective, he is peering through the thick, acrid gun smoke drifting across the water. He sees the British ship approaching, but the deck is completely empty, save for the bodies.
He thinks his broadside has wiped them out.
Exactly. The two wooden ships violently grind together. The pirates throw heavy iron grappling hooks over the rails, locking the vessels together. And then Blackbeard's men unleash a weapon that is essentially an 18th century IED.
Yeah, they used makeshift grenades. These were heavy glass bottles packed tight with gunpowder, lead shot, and jagged pieces of scrap iron.
Like shrapnel.
Exactly. They jammed a quick burning match into the neck of the bottle, lit it, and hurled it onto the deck of the Jane.
Think about the physics of that. A glass bottle filled with explosives shattering on a wooden deck. The blast wave creates a deadly cloud of glass shards, iron shrapnel, and burning powder. It was designed to clear out anyone who might be hiding behind the barrels on deck.
As the smoke from the grenades obscures the deck, Blackbeard and his men swarm over the rails. They leap onto the British ship, cheering, their cutlasses drawn, expecting to easily execute the few remaining survivors.
And as their boots hit the deck, the track snaps shut. Maynard signals his men, and bursting out of the dark hold of the ship, screaming, comes the surviving Royal Navy crew.
It is the ultimate maritime jump scare.
Truly.
The pirates go from absolute triumph to total ambush in a fraction of a second. What follows is some of the most visceral, terrifying medieval hand-to-hand combat in history.
The combat mechanics here are brutal. This is close quarters. The deck is physically slipping under their leather boots because of the sheer volume of blood from the initial cannon strike. You have the deafening, sharp cracks of flintlock pistols.
And we should note, flintlocks were notoriously unreliable.
Right.
You only get one shot. assuming the powder doesn't misfire from the humidity of the mist. Once you fire, it takes far too long to reload in a melee, so you immediately throw the heavy pistol like a club, or drop it, and draw your cutlass.
It devolves instantly into blades, the heavy metallic clang of thick iron cutlasses striking each other, the sickening thud of steel cleaving into bone and wood. And in the absolute center of this swirling melee of screaming men, Maynard and Blackbeard spot each other.
The lieutenant and the pirate warlord. They both raise their flintlock pistols and fire at point-blank range.
Through the smoke, Maynard's shot hits Blackbeard directly in the body, but incredibly, Blackbeard's shot misses. The pirate absorbs a .50 caliber lead ball to the torso, barely flinches, throws the empty gun aside, and draws his massive cutlass. And he charges Maynard.
The physical disparity is immense here. Teach is a towering, enraged giant. Maynard is a standard naval officer. They clash swords. And Blackbeard strikes downward with such immense, desperate force that he literally snaps Maynard's heavy cutlass right at the iron hilt.
Maynard is left holding a useless handle. He is completely disarmed, backing away on a blood-slicked deck, totally isolated from his men. Blackbeard steps forward, raises his sword, and prepares to deliver the fatal blow that will sever Maynard's head.
But just as the sword begins its downward arc, one of Maynard's men, a Scottish Highlander, lunges in from the periphery. He swings his broadsword and slashes Blackbeard deeply across the back of the neck and throat.
The arterial spray erupts across the deck. The physical force of that strike from the Highlander redirects Blackbeard's swing just enough. Instead of taking Maynard's head clean off, the blade deflects and severely slashes Maynard's knuckles.
Now, any normal human being whose throat has just been slashed and who has a massive gunshot wound in their chest would immediately drop dead.
Right, game over.
But Blackbeard's adrenaline is so high, his sheer willpower is so terrifying that he simply spins around and keeps fighting.
It takes a swarm. Several more of Maynard's crew rush the giant. They are stabbing, hacking, and firing point blank into him. Finally, while trying to cock another pistol, the towering pirate warlord collapses onto the bloody deck, dead.
When the melee finally ended and the surviving pirates surrendered, Maynard had the ship's surgeon examine Teach's body. The autopsy report is staggering. Blackbeard had absorbed 5 direct gunshot wounds and suffered roughly 20 severe cutlass lacerations before his body finally shut down.
20 cuts, 5 bullet holes. It is literally like a horror movie where the monster simply refuses to die until you completely dismember him.
He just kept coming.
And the aftermath of this battle strips away any remaining romance of the pirate era because it is pure medieval brutality.
Well, absolutely. Maynard doesn't respectfully bury his fallen foe. He has a logistical problem. To claim the massive financial bounty from the crown, he needs absolute proof that Edward Teach is dead.
And they didn't have cameras.
Exactly. In an era before photography, there is only one way to provide that proof.
He decapitates him. The British sailors take axes and sever the massive, bearded, blood-soaked head from the body. Maynard takes that terrifying head and uses ropes to tie it to the bowsprit, which is the long wooden pole extending from the very front of his sloop.
And the headless corpse.
Yeah.
They simply drag it to the edge of the deck and kick it over the wooden rail, letting it plunge into the dark, freezing waters of the inlet.
It is an incredibly gory end, but what fascinates me is how this extreme, horrific conclusion acts as a catalyst. The moment that headless body hit the water, Blackbeard stopped being a historical figure and instantly became a myth.
The transformation was immediate. Even the British sailors who killed him started whispering legends that very afternoon. They claimed that the headless body didn't just sink. They swore it swam frantically around the Jane 3 times before finally slipping into the dark depths.
That's so eerie.
By displaying the severed head and tossing the mutilated body into the very waters where he used to exert absolute control, history was immediately blended into ghost lore. It was the birth of an American phantom.
It is the definitive bloody end to the monster at the helm. But I want to pivot here. I want you to hold on to that mental image of the freezing dark waters of the Outer Banks. Because the horror we just dissected was inflicted by a man. It was calculated malice and greed.
Human cruelty.
Right. But as we move forward into 1837, we are going to look at a tragedy where the villain isn't a pirate. The villain is the blind, crushing, indifferent violence of the ocean itself. And honestly, I think it is infinitely more terrifying.
The story of the Steamboat Home is a tragedy born from a completely different kind of monster, technological arrogance.
Hubris again?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
To understand how a disaster of this magnitude happens, we have to deeply analyze the era. By 1837, the steam engine is completely revolutionizing human travel. For centuries, humanity was entirely at the mercy of the wind. Now, with coal and steam, we actually believed we had conquered nature.
We believed we could just bully the ocean.
Exactly. The steamboat home was a marvel of its time. It was a 220-foot-long side-wheel paddle steamer. It was incredibly luxurious, built specifically to cater to wealthy, first-class passengers traveling the lucrative route between New York and Charleston, South Carolina.
High-end travel.
But there was a catastrophic, fatal flaw inherent in her design and really in the prevailing culture of steam travel at the time.
Let's break down the engineering of the steamboat home, because this is where the hubris really lies. If I am looking at the hull of a riverboat versus an ocean-faring vessel, what is the fatal difference?
It comes down to the keel and the draft. A traditional ocean-faring ship, like Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge, has a deep, heavy V-shaped keel. That deep draft acts like a knife, cutting through massive ocean swells, and it provides a very low center of gravity to keep the ship stable in high winds.
Right, it's anchored down into the water.
But the steamboat home was essentially built like a massive riverboat.
Yeah.
She was incredibly long, 220 feet, but very narrow, and she had a flat bottom with a very shallow draft.
Why build it that way?
Because this design is incredibly fast on a calm river or protected sound, because it simply skims over the surface of the water instead of pushing through it.
It's like riding a skateboard on smooth asphalt. It's fast and efficient. But if you take that same skateboard and try to ride it over a field of massive, shifting boulders...
It destroys itself.
Yeah.
When a flat-bottomed boat hits a 10-foot ocean swell, it doesn't cut through the water. It launches off the crest of the wave and then slams violently down into the trough.
The impact must be huge.
The physical stress on a 220-foot wooden hull slamming onto the water over and over again is immense. Furthermore, she was propelled by two massive paddle wheels on the port and starboard sides.
Okay.
In a heavy ocean roll, one side of the ship tilts way up, lifting a massive paddle wheel completely out of the water where it spins uselessly in the air, while the other wheel plunges deep underwater, placing a terrifying asymmetrical strain on the central steam engine.
So she was fundamentally unfit for severe offshore weather. But there was intense economic pressure from the owners to set speed records. They wanted to prove that steam could dominate the Atlantic coast. So when Captain Carleton White leaves New York in early October 1837, carrying about 140 passengers and crew, he is already pushing the absolute structural limits of this vessel.
And they sailed directly into a monster. A massive, late-season hurricane is churning up the coast, heading straight for the graveyard of the Atlantic.
Now, maritime navigation in 1837 wasn't entirely blind. They didn't have radar, obviously, but they had barometers. Captain White can literally see the atmospheric pressure plunging.
He knows what's coming?
He can see the sky turning the color of a bruised plum. The wind is intensifying. The swells are growing massive. The most basic rule of seamanship dictates that you turn toward the shore, seek a protected port or inlet, drop your heavy anchors, and wait out the hurricane. But he doesn't do that. Why?
Economic pressure overriding basic survival instincts. He was determined to make record time to Charleston. He honestly believed that the massive steam engine could simply overpower the hurricane. It is the epitome of technological hubris.
He thinks he's invincible.
He orders the engineers to shovel more coal into the furnaces and tries to power straight through the storm.
But as they pass Cape Hatteras and near the treacherous shoals of Ocracoke Island, the hurricane unleashes its absolute full fury. The wind shifts into a howling gale. The ocean becomes a chaotic, boiling nightmare.
The physical deterioration of the steamboat home begins almost immediately. The shallow hull is being tossed around like a cork. The ship is flexing so violently that the rigid oak seams connected to the hull planks actually begin to pop open.
They're snapping.
Freezing ocean water begins pouring into the lower decks and the engine room.
Put yourself in the first-class cabin. It is the evening of October 9th. Night has completely fallen. You are a wealthy merchant or a politician. You paid for luxury, but now you are trapped in pitch-black darkness.
A living nightmare.
The lanterns are out. The sound is deafening, the roaring of the steam engine fighting the howling of the wind, the shrieking of the tearing wood. The floor beneath your feet is tilting at terrifying angles.
And then the reality of the water sets in. The crew realizes the mechanical pumps cannot keep up with the flooding. The water is rising fast in the hold, so they're forced to organize bucket brigades.
With the passengers?
Yes, they conscript the wealthy passengers, men, women, and children, handing them buckets in the dark, forcing them to stand in freezing, waist-deep water, desperately bailing water out of the sinking ship.
It is a futile effort. The water eventually reaches the roaring furnaces of the steam engine and extinguishes the fires. The massive engines hiss, shudder, and die. The steamboat home is now completely dead in the water, drifting helplessly in a hurricane.
It's at this point that Captain White realizes his fatal, arrogant error. The ship is actively sinking beneath them. His only remaining option is to use whatever tattered sails they have left to intentionally drive the dying ship onto the beach at Ocracoke, hoping the passengers can scramble onto the sand before the ship breaks apart.
He aims for the shore, but the graveyard of the Atlantic doesn't let you get to the beach that easily. The ship strikes the outer sandbars, roughly 100 yards from the actual shoreline.
So close, but so far.
It hits hard, gets lodged in the compacted sand, and is immediately immobilized right in the middle of the heaviest, most violent surf zone.
This is where the sheer sensory overload simply breaks the human mind. The ship is stuck. The wind is screaming. The ocean is effectively tearing the vessel apart splinter by splinter. There are 140 people trapped on the disintegrating upper decks. We have to talk about the eyewitness accounts from the survivors because they describe a reality that is pure, unadulterated nightmare. The ship is breaking apart so rapidly and the waves are so massive that every single wave that crashed over the hull was literally acting like a giant, indifferent hand.
Survivors recounted that the waves would wash entirely over the decks, and when the water receded, groups of people were simply gone. The ocean was plucking men, women, and children directly into the freezing sea.
1 second, you are gripping the wooden railing, screaming, holding onto the hand of a friend or a family member. And the next second, a wall of black water hits you. The cold shocks your system, your grip slips, and when you open your eyes, the person next to you has simply vanished into the dark void.
Now we have to remember there were no widespread life preservers back then. The ship only carried 3 small wooden lifeboats.
Just 3.
In the panic, as the passengers desperately tried to lower them, all 3 were immediately smashed against the side of the hull or capsized by the massive surf, drowning the people inside. There was absolutely no rescue equipment left.
This brings me back to that terrifying thought. We always assume that our technology builds a wall between us and nature. We get on a massive cruise ship or an airplane, and we feel fundamentally safe because civilization has built this metal or wooden shell around us.
We feel protected.
But when you were on a disintegrating wooden boat in 1837 in the pitch black, and the ocean is systematically, indifferently peeling human beings off the deck and swallowing them whole, how quickly does that illusion of civilization vanish?
It vanishes instantly. You are reduced to an animal desperately clinging to a piece of driftwood. The social hierarchy of the first-class passengers meant absolutely nothing to the freezing water. The home completely shattered into splinters in less than an hour.
An hour.
The remaining passengers were forced to cling to pieces of the ripped-up hurricane deck, trying to ride the wreckage through the violent churning surf, praying they would wash up on the sand before hypothermia or drowning took them.
The survival rate is horrific. Out of the roughly 140 people on board, 90 perished in that freezing water. 90 lives snuffed out in the dark. But to fully understand the horror of this event, we have to look at it from the other side of the surf.
The perspective from the land.
Right. Because while this nightmare is unfolding out in the breakers, the villagers of Ocracoke Island are enduring the exact same hurricane in their small wooden homes.
The barrier island communities in the 19th century were a completely different breed of people. To understand them, you have to understand their profound isolation. Ocracoke was only accessible by boat. There were no bridges.
They were on their own.
Totally on their own. The community was incredibly tight-knit. They relied entirely on oral history, and they possessed a hypersensitive connection to their environment.
Their entire survival depended on reading nature.
Exactly. When your livelihood, your food, and your safety depend on reading the subtle shifts in the wind, the color of the tide, and the behavior of the birds, you develop an intuition that often borders on the supernatural. In communities like this, superstitions, omens, and premonitions were not taken lightly. They were treated as vital data.
And that brings us to one of the most chilling accounts in our historical sources. We heard about this from Amy Howard, who meticulously researches and runs the Ocracoke Ghost and History Tours. She detailed a story that has been deeply embedded in the island's oral history for nearly 2 centuries, and it plays out like a literal jump scare in a horror film. It revolves around the Echo Islander named Jack Williams.
It is the middle of the night on October 9th. The hurricane is raging over the island. The wind is tearing at the cedar shingles of his roof. The rain is blowing horizontal. Jack Williams is asleep in his bed, but he is suddenly jolted awake in a cold sweat by a terrifying nightmare.
Now, on Ocracoke, if the man of the house wakes up terrified from a dream during a massive storm, he doesn't just roll over and go back to sleep. He treats it as a dire warning.
He immediately wakes his entire family up. He brings his wife and children downstairs into the main room, huddling them around the faint, flickering glow of a kerosene lantern. He is trembling, and he begins to recount this vivid, highly specific vision.
He tells his family that he dreamt he was walking alone along the desolate, wind-whipped beach of Ocracoke. But the beach wasn't empty. He says he found bodies. Dead men, women, and children, soaking wet, laid out in a massive line stretching down the sand.
Just endless bodies.
He describes watching the heavy surf continuously rolling in, depositing more lifeless bodies onto the shore, and then the true horror of the dream hits. The freezing black waves begin to wash up higher, wrapping around Jack's own ankles, physically pulling him toward the ocean, trying to drag him in with the dead.
He is sitting by the lantern trembling, his family staring at him in terrified silence as he finishes describing this vision of a mass grave on their doorstep. And literally, at the exact moment he finishes speaking the last words of the dream, bang, bang.
A frantic, violent pounding on their heavy wooden door.
It shatters the silence. They cautiously open the door to the howling hurricane, and a man collapses into their hallway. He is shivering violently, coughing up seawater, his clothes shredded. It is one of the few survivors from the steamboat home.
He had managed to cling to a shattered timber, ride the violent surf to the beach, and had dragged his battered body through the flooded, pitch-black scrub brush of the island. He was blindly following the faint, distant glow of Jack Williams's kerosene lantern shining through the window pane.
The survivor chokes out the horrifying truth. A massive luxury steamboat has shattered on the shoals just offshore. The water is full of people.
The islanders don't hesitate for a second. Jack Williams and the other villagers immediately drop everything, grab their lanterns and heavy ropes, and rush out into the teeth of the hurricane, heading for the beach. They spend the rest of the night blindly pulling whoever they can from the freezing surf. But it isn't until the morning light finally breaks over the graveyard of the Atlantic that the true cinematic horror of reality sets in.
As the gray dawn illuminates the shoreline, the villagers stand on the dunes and look down at the exact scene Jack Williams saw in his nightmare. The pristine beach is completely strewn with massive, splintered timbers from the home. And scattered among the wreckage are the dead.
90 bodies. Wealthy politicians in shredded silk, women, young children, all laid out along the tide line, tangled in seaweed and debris.
The villagers immediately do everything they can for the roughly 40 survivors, taking them into their small homes, giving them dry clothes, hot food, and medical care. But then the island is faced with an incredibly grim, massive logistical nightmare.
What do you do with 90 dead bodies on a tiny sandbar island in the 1830s?
You are completely isolated. You cannot transport them to the mainland. The boats are destroyed, the weather is still dangerous, and there is no refrigeration. Decomposition in the humid, salty air of North Carolina begins incredibly fast. The threat of disease spreading to the village is real and immediate.
So, with absolutely no other options, the villagers are forced to undertake a deeply macabre task. They methodically walk the beach, dragging the waterlogged bodies of these aristocrats and their children just above the high tide line into the soft dunes. And right there, using simple shovels, they dig shallow graves in the beach sand and bury all 90 victims side by side.
It was an act of grim necessity, but it fundamentally changed the physical geography of the beach.
And I want you to stop and really process what this means for the modern world. Millions of people vacation on the Outer Banks every year.
It's a massive tourist destination.
Exactly. When you rent a beautiful beach house on Ocracoke, when you are wading in the warm summer surf, or when you are sitting in a canvas chair watching your kids use plastic shovels to dig sandcastles in the dunes, you are literally digging in the exact same sands where 90 doomed, terrified souls were hastily buried in shallow graves.
It is not an abstract piece of history. It is tangibly under your feet. Amy Howard actually noted a chilling modern incident that proves this. Recently, a casual beachgoer was walking along the dunes after a storm had eroded some of the sand. They looked down and saw a strange shape protruding from the dune line. It was an ancient, unidentifiable human bone washing out of the sand.
Oh my God. When the tourists realized what they were holding, they panicked, dropped it, and frantically buried it right back where they found it.
It is a stark, physical reminder that the island itself is a mass graveyard. And from an anthropological perspective, when a physical location is saturated with that volume of unexpected, violent death, it inevitably gives birth to intense folklore.
Which transitions us perfectly into our final exploration today,
Yeah.
the echoes of the dead and the haunted Outer Banks. Why do certain places feel so incredibly heavy? On one side, this tiny island, you have the bloody, violent decapitation of Blackbeard. On the other side, you have the mass drowning of 90 innocent people in the dark.
Psychologists and anthropologists study this phenomenon closely. Places of immense concentrated tragedy generate ghost lore as a communal coping mechanism.
It's how they process it.
Exactly. When a small community is constantly surrounded by the trauma of shipwrecks, drownings, and pirate violence, creating a narrative about ghosts provides a sense of structure to the chaos. It is a way for the human brain to process and organize the sudden, violent loss of life. It gives the trauma a face. But I have to admit, even knowing the psychological framework behind it, the specific local accounts are incredibly unnerving.
Let's talk about Springer's Point. Today, it's a beautiful, protected nature preserve on Ocracoke. But historically, it is the exact patch of shoreline bordering Teach's Hole where Blackbeard was slaughtered by Maynard. It's the water where his headless body was unceremoniously dumped.
The exact spot.
Fast forward to the 20th century, and this property was owned by a very wealthy, highly eccentric industrialist named Sam Jones.
Sam Jones was a fascinating character. He absolutely fell in love with the extreme isolation of Ocracoke. He was the man who built the first airstrip on the island. He loved the quiet, heavily wooded environment of Springer's Point. He felt such a deep spiritual connection to that specific piece of land that he left bizarre instructions for his death.
Very bizarre.
He refused to be buried with his previous wives on the mainland. Instead, he insisted on being buried in a small, private family cemetery right there on Springer's Point, buried alongside his absolute favorite companion, his horse, Ike D.
So you have a wealthy eccentric and his horse resting eternally in the exact same sandy soil where Blackbeard's blood washed ashore. But the story that truly chills me is the account of Sam Jones's loyal caretaker, a local Ocracoke man named Roy Parsons.
This story is terrifying.
After Sam Jones passed away, Roy's job was to take his small skiff out to Springer's Point, hack back the overgrown brush, and maintain the property and the small graveyard.
Springer's Point is heavily wooded. It's thick with massive, ancient live oaks whose branches twist in bizarre shapes, dripping with thick gray Spanish moss. It naturally blocks out the sunlight. One evening, Roy is wrapping up his maintenance work. It is right around dusk, that liminal space between day and night when shadows start playing tricks on your eyes.
He gathers his tools and starts walking down the sandy path toward his boat. He passes the small graveyard. And as he looks over toward the old, brick-lined water well situated right next to Sam Jones's grave, he stops. Because there is a figure sitting on the edge of the well.
Now, Roy is a pragmatist. He's a local islander. His immediate logical assumption is that a tourist wandered off the path or a neighbor is playing a joke. So he calls out a friendly greeting, "Hey there."
But the figure doesn't respond, it doesn't flinch, it just sits there in the gathering shadows. And Ray later recounted that at that exact moment, the atmosphere fundamentally changed. He got this immediate, sinking, heavy feeling of pure dread in his gut. The hair on his arms stood straight up, his instincts flared, screaming at him that something was profoundly, dangerously wrong.
He doesn't investigate further. He turns his back and starts walking very briskly down the path toward his boat, which is tied up in the shallow water at the shoreline. But the feeling of being watched is overwhelming. He glances over his shoulder.
The figure is no longer sitting on the well. It has stood up, and it is silently, rapidly advancing down the path directly behind him.
Roy abandons any pretense of calm. He drops his tools and breaks into a dead sprint. He bursts out of the tree line, hits the beach, and splashes through the shallow water, hurling his body into a small wooden skiff.
Just trying to escape.
He is in such a state of absolute panic that his hands are shaking too violently to even attempt to pull the starter cord on the outboard motor.
He grabs the wooden oars, slots them into the oarlocks, and starts rowing with frantic, desperate strength, pulling the boat as fast as humanly possible away from the shore, out into the deeper water of the inlet.
Once he is a safe distance out in the channel, his chest heaving, he finally stops rowing and looks back at the shoreline. The sun has essentially set, and the thick evening mist is beginning to roll in off the Atlantic. And Roy watches, paralyzed, as the figure emerges from the tree line. It walks off the sandy beach and continues walking directly into the dark water of the inlet. It wades knee-deep, then thigh-deep. But it doesn't swim, and it doesn't sink.
Roy swore that the figure simply walked into the water and slowly dissolved into the mist. It just dissipated into the fog, leaving no ripples. Roy Parsons was a hardened local, but he swore on his life that he never, ever set foot on Springer's Point at dusk again.
Was it the lingering spirit of Sam Jones? Was it one of the 90 victims of the steamboat home? Or was it the restless phantom of Edward Teach, endlessly pacing the shoreline searching for his severed head? The locals will tell you that if you look out over Teach's Hole on certain quiet, stormy nights, the unexplainable phenomena aren't just limited to the shoreline.
Right, the hauntings extend out into the deep water. There are modern, pragmatic mariners, commercial fishermen who navigate these waters for a living and rely entirely on modern radar and GPS, who report terrifying encounters with what they call the Phantom Fleet.
The maritime legends insist that Blackbeard's flagship still violently patrols the inland. Fishermen anchored alone in the dark channel have reported hearing deep, guttural, disembodied spectral voices echoing across the water, shouting archaic commands.
Like ghost ships.
They check their modern radar screens, and the screens are completely blank. There is not another vessel for miles.
They hear the heavy, rhythmic splashing of dozens of oars pulling in unison. They hear the agonizing, massive groaning of huge oak timbers flexing under sail. But when they shine their heavy spotlights into the fog, there is nothing there.
Some captains even claim to have seen the visual manifestation. A massive, glowing, burning shape suspended in the dense mist. The massive spectral outline of an 18th century galleon bathes in an unnatural, hazy, fiery light, forever returning to its favorite anchorage before vanishing.
It brings me to this deeply philosophical question. Does it really matter if ghosts are actually scientifically real? Or is it enough that the ocean holds so much trauma, so much recorded human misery, that our brains simply project these horrors onto the fog?
The environment definitely plays a role.
If you know factually that 90 terrified people drowned screaming on this specific stretch of sand, or that a pirate's severed head dripped blood into this specific channel, maybe the atmosphere just absorbs that emotional weight, and when you are out there alone, sensory deprived in the dark, the environment just plays that trauma back to you.
It is a highly compelling psychological theory. The environment of the Outer Banks, the absolute isolation, the shifting, unstable sands, the unpredictable and violent weather creates a natural sensory deprivation chamber. It allows the human imagination to step in and fill the empty, dark blanks. And the violent history of the graveyard of the Atlantic provides an incredibly dark script for that imagination to read from.
As we finally wrap up this deep dive, I want to pull back and look at the massive recurring themes we've unearthed today in these sources. In both the story of the calculating, treacherous warlord Blackbeard and the arrogant, doomed Captain White of the steamboat home, we see the exact same fatal flaw.
The oldest tragic flaw in human history.
Hubris. The absolute unshakable belief that we are in control. Blackbeard believed his intelligence and his capacity for violence allowed him to outsmart his own loyal crew, outsmart the colonial law, and outsmart the sea by intentionally wrecking his own ship.
He believed he could manipulate the world like a chessboard.
It led directly to his isolated, bloody slaughter on the deck of a sloop. Captain White believed that his massive steam engine, his coal fires, and his iron rivets could simply overpower a hurricane. He believed human engineering had conquered nature. It led directly to 90 innocent people washing into the graveyard of the Atlantic.
The ocean is the ultimate indifferent equalizer. It does not care about your rank, your wealth, your royal pardons, or your technology.
Not at all.
When you are on land, you have options. If a storm hits, you can seek shelter in a basement. If someone attacks you, you can run into the woods and hide. But when you are on a sinking ship, in the middle of a freezing, violent ocean, there's literally nowhere to go. You are entirely at the mercy of an environment that is fundamentally hostile to human life. It is the absolute terrifying loss of control.
And I think that is exactly why these shipwreck stories, these historical horrors, grip our imaginations so tightly. They bypass our logical brains and tap directly into our deepest, most ancient evolutionary fears.
Fear of the dark.
The fear of the freezing cold, the fear of being unable to breathe, and the terrifying realization that despite all our advanced civilization, despite our smartphones and our airplanes, our physical bodies are incredibly fragile.
We are just temporary visitors in an environment that covers 70% of our planet.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought to mull over, something to think about the next time you stand on a sandy beach and look out at the flat, calm horizon. Think about the concept of water memory.
That's a profound concept.
There have been millions of unrecorded, desperate final breaths taken beneath the waves throughout human history. From ancient wooden galleons shattered by reefs to steel submarines crushed by the abyssal pressure, the ocean is essentially a vast, silent, liquid archive of human tragedy.
A museum of loss.
And as humanity pushes forward, as we continue to build larger, more technologically advanced ships to explore the deepest trenches of the ocean, and even as we look upward, building new metallic ships to sail out into the dark, freezing void of deep space, are we simply setting the stage for new disasters? Are we currently building the technologically advanced ghost ships of the future in our shipyards today?
The hubris never really goes away. We just wrap it in better technology.
Exactly. The next time you look at a body of water, whether it is the churning, violent surf of the graveyard of the Atlantic or just a quiet, glassy lake at dusk, take a moment to wonder about the silent, forgotten tragedies resting just beneath the surface, patiently waiting for the mist to roll in.